The Chicago Bears and Green Bay Packers rivalry dates back to nearly 100 years ago when the two teams first met in 1921. It's the oldest and most historic rivalry in the NFL, with 200 matchups all time. In this video, we'll look back at a controversial event early on that almost cost one of the teams to lose their franchise while almost ending a legendary rivalry before it even began. Before we get started, I just want to say welcome to All Sports History. This is a channel where you'll find many sports documentaries on sports leagues like the NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, and much more. So please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell if you don't want to miss any of those. Okay, let's get back to today's video. Before the Chicago Bears and Green Bay Packers became the hugely popular teams that they are today, they began as struggling football teams hoping to make enough money to play games just to get by. To find out how this legendary rivalry began, let's go back to how these teams got started in the first place. In 1920, the A.E. Staley Food Company, a manufacturing company coincidentally founded by a man also named A.E. Staley, was interested in creating a company football team. Because they were headquartered in Decatur, Illinois, they would nickname the team the Decatur Staleys. Shortly after, two men, George Halas and Edward Dutch Sterneman, were hired to run the team. A.E. Staley believed that team sports would help build character in its employees, as it already had formed a company baseball team a few years prior. Part of the agreement for Halas to run the team was that he could hire his former teammates from past football teams to work in the factory and play on the company team. The factory workers would become semi-professional football players, as the team would become a founding member of the American Professional Football Association, also known as the APFA. A year later, the team would move to Chicago, mainly for financial reasons in order to play in a larger market. The team name would change to the Chicago Staleys, and full control over the team was turned over to Halas and Sterneman. Soon after, Halas would purchase the rights to the team for $100, and he looked to rename the club. Many teams in those days, usually inspired by the professional baseball teams in the same city, would name their football teams in a similar way. Halas took inspiration from the Chicago Cubs baseball team and were nicknamed the Bears. Halas also adopted the orange and blue colors from his college, the University of Illinois. Prior to the Bears forming in Decatur, another team formed 375 miles away in Green Bay, Wisconsin. On August 11, 1919, Curly Lambeau and George Whitney Calhoun created a football team after Lambeau received $500 from his employer, the Indian Packing Company. Originally, Lambeau wanted to call the team the Green Bay Indians in honor of the company that helped fund the team's uniforms. Lambeau's girlfriend at the time, making fun of his lack of originality, sarcastically replied, "Why don't you just name them the Green Bay Packers?" Lambeau actually liked the idea, and the name stuck. They initially played teams throughout Wisconsin and Michigan during the 1919 season. Over the next 2 years, they would be bought out by the Clare brothers, Emmett Clare and John Clare, both of whom worked for the Acme Packing Corporation, and they would change the team name to the Acme Packers. Shortly after that, in 1921, the team joined the newly formed APFA. Their membership wouldn't last long, however, as the Packers had their franchise revoked for having played 3 college players during a game. The scandal occurred when the Packers, late in the 1921 season, decided to play 3 college players from Notre Dame using fake names. Although the game itself was a non-league game, the Packers were still subject to league rules as a franchise member. 1 month later, on January 28, 1922, the Packers were thrown out of the league for violating the rules. But this is also where things get a little bit weird. During my research, I found several articles with conflicting information about just what exactly took place. Most of the conflicting information seems to stem from a series of books about the history of the Packers published in the late 1980s by author Larry Names. In one book, Names states that the Packers used ineligible players in a game against the Chicago Bears, and it was George Halas who uncovered the cheating scandal and brought it to the attention of the APFA. However, current Packers team historian Cliff Crystal refutes the story as purely made up in an article on the Packers website, which I'll link to below. He states that while the Packers did use ineligible players, it was in a game against the Racine Legion, who were a professional football team from Racine, Wisconsin. And that game took place on December 4th, 1921, and not against the Chicago Bears, as name had stated. Crystal also stated that it was the Racine Journal-News that broke the story, and then later the Chicago Tribune picked up the story and implored the APFA to ban Green Bay with George Halas having not much to do with this situation at all. In either case, the APFA moved to terminate Green Bay's franchise, with Halas voting in favor of the termination. 5 months later, after being banned, Curly Lambeau successfully appealed to the APFA, and the Packers were approved with a new entry fee of $50. Coincidentally, at the same league meeting, the APFA decided to officially change their name to the National Football League. However much George Halas was involved or not, this controversial event would go down in Bears-Packers lore as the start of their legendary rivalry. The NFL began to organize teams by divisions in 1933, and since then, both the Bears and Packers have always played in the same division. Here are just a few notable highlights from some of their early matchups. The first meeting between the two teams on the field took place on November 27, 1921. The Chicago Bears, seen here striking an excellent prom pose, dominated the game, with Gaylord Pete Stinchcomb scoring the first touchdown on a 45-yard run. Chicago would beat the Packers 20-0. It would take Green Bay 4 years before they beat Chicago for the first time. On September 27, 1925, while at home, the Packers managed to defeat the Bears in a close game 14-10. On September 28, 1930, the Packers beat the Bears 7-0, completing their 5th straight shutout over Chicago. As of recording this video, it's the longest consecutive shutout streak in the series. The first playoff meeting between the two teams took place on December 14, 1941. This was a one-game playoff to determine the winner of the Western Division Championship. The Bears handedly beat the Packers 33-14, and this would be the only playoff meeting between Chicago and Green Bay for the next 69 years when they finally met again in early 2011. While the Bears and Packers have the longest standing rivalry in NFL history, there have been a few moments where they put the rivalry aside. During the Great Depression, the Chicago Bears, like many businesses, had fallen on hard times. George Halas had trouble being able to meet payroll to pay his players, and he was forced to borrow money from his own mother and mother-in-law just to keep things afloat. The Green Bay Packers offered to lend Halas $1,500 in 1932, and Halas gratefully accepted the loan. Many years later, Halas would return the gesture by actually helping to save the Green Bay Packers franchise in 1956. The Packers were trying to get a new stadium built in Green Bay, but were facing the threat of relocation if they couldn't get enough public funding to help build the new stadium. Halas, who was passionate about keeping the Bears-Packers rivalry alive, came to Green Bay and publicly spoke out about supporting the measures that would eventually build the new city stadium. A year later, the new stadium would open, and in 1965, shortly after Curly Lambeau's death, it was renamed to Lambeau Field in his honor. It was also Halas who suggested that the Packers hire Vince Lombardi to be their new head coach in 1958 after the Packers team president sought out his advice. Lombardi, in return, had great respect for Halas, and supposedly Halas was the only person Lombardi would refer to as coach. Halas' recommendation would pay off huge for Green Bay. Lombardi helped lead the Packers to 5 NFL championships and 2 Super Bowl wins. Over the years, it's been clear that Chicago and Green Bay's rivalry has had a long-lasting impact on the growth of the game. As of recording this video, both teams have met 200 times, with the Packers winning 99 games and the Bears winning 95 and tying 6 times. The longest winning streak is held by the Packers at 10 consecutive games from 1994 to 1998. The Bears hold the largest margin of victory in the series with a 61-7 win that took place on December 7, 1980. Curly Lambeau, George Halas, and most recently Bill Belichick have the distinction of coaching their teams to the most NFL championships, with having done it 6 times. No two teams have played each other more, no two teams have won more combined championships, and no two teams have had more combined Hall of Famers inducted. So that does it for this video on legendary rivals. What did you think about the Packers being kicked out of the league for playing college players? And what's been one of your favorite moments from the Bears-Packers rivalry? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button and feel free to share this video with anyone else who might also enjoy it. For more sports history, check out my website at allsportshistory.com and be sure to follow my social media pages, which I've posted the links in the description below. And thanks for watching.